You're lying in bed scrolling through photos of people laughing at a party you weren't invited to. Your phone is full of contacts. Your messages are full of unread notifications. And yet somehow, you have never felt more alone. Most people assume loneliness is just a feeling, a temporary sadness that passes once you're busy again. But that's not what the research actually shows. Loneliness is not just an emotion, it is a biological state. And in the second half of the 20th century, scientists began to discover that it does something to the human brain and body that almost nobody expected. Let's start with the man who spent his entire career trying to prove this. John Cacioppo was a neuroscientist at the University of Chicago, and for over 20 years he ran one of the largest long-term studies on loneliness ever conducted. He called it the Chicago Health, Aging, and Social Relations Study. He tracked hundreds of people for years, drawing blood, scanning brains, measuring stress hormones. And what he found didn't just describe loneliness, it redefined it. Cacioppo discovered that chronically lonely people showed a distinct pattern of gene expression. Their immune cells were producing more inflammatory proteins than people who felt socially connected. At the same time, the genes responsible for fighting off viruses were suppressed. He named this pattern the conserved transcriptional response to adversity. In plain terms, your body reacts to loneliness the same way it reacts to physical danger. It prepares for an attack that never actually comes. And it does this quietly, for years, without you ever noticing. Why would evolution build a body that punishes you for being alone? Cacioppo's answer was simple, and a little unsettling. For most of human history, being alone meant being unprotected. A human without a group was a human without defenders, without shared food, without anyone to warn you when a predator was near. So the brain evolved to treat isolation as an emergency. Loneliness isn't a modern inconvenience, it's an ancient alarm system still ringing inside you, thousands of years after the danger it was built for stopped making sense. But Cacioppo wasn't the only one uncovering this. In 2003, two psychologists named Naomi Eisenberger and Matthew Lieberman ran an experiment that would change how science understood pain itself. They placed participants inside an fMRI scanner and had them play a simple computer game called Cyberball, tossing a virtual ball back and forth with two other players. Except the other players weren't real. They were programmed. And partway through the game, they simply stopped throwing the ball to the participant. What happened next surprised everyone. The brain scans showed a spike of activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, the exact same region that lights up when your body experiences physical pain. Being excluded from a simple ball tossing game activated the same neural circuitry as a burn or a broken bone. Eisenberger and Lieberman published their findings in the journal Science, and the implications were staggering. Social rejection isn't a metaphorical kind of pain. To your brain, it is real pain, processed through the same machinery your body uses when it's actually being hurt. So loneliness changes your gene expression, it fires up the same brain circuits as physical injury. But how far can this actually go? For the answer to that question, you have to go back further to a much darker chapter of psychology. In the 1950s, a researcher named Harry Harlow at the University of Wisconsin ran a series of experiments on infant rhesus monkeys that are still discussed and still debated today. Harlow separated newborn monkeys from their mothers and raised them with two artificial surrogates. One was made of bare wire but held a bottle of milk. The other was covered in soft cloth but offered no food at all. Logic would suggest the monkeys should cling to whichever surrogate fed them. They didn't. The infant monkeys spent nearly all of their time clinging to the cloth mother, only leaving to feed from the wire one before rushing right back. Comfort, it turned out, mattered more than nutrition. But Harlow's most disturbing discovery came later, when he isolated infant monkeys completely, with no surrogate at all for extended periods. Those monkeys didn't just grow up sad, they grew up fundamentally altered. They rocked back and forth obsessively. They couldn't interact socially with other monkeys as adults. Some stopped eating entirely. Isolation early in life didn't just leave an emotional scar. It appeared to permanently rewire how their brains processed connection itself. Harlow's work was controversial, and rightly so, but it forced an uncomfortable question into serious science. What if isolation doesn't just make you feel bad, but physically reshapes the brain during the periods when it needs connection most? Decades later, scientists finally got a way to study that question in humans, though nobody would have wished for the circumstances. In the early 1990s, thousands of children were discovered in Romanian orphanages, left in cribs for nearly all hours of the day, with almost no physical contact or individual attention. Researchers Charles Nelson, Nathan Fox, and Charles Zena launched what became known as the Bucharest Early Intervention Project, one of the most important studies on childhood isolation ever conducted. Using brain scans, they found that children who experienced prolonged early isolation had measurably reduced brain volume, less white matter connecting different brain regions, and altered activity in areas responsible for emotional regulation. But here's the detail almost nobody talks about. When some of these children were placed into loving foster families before the age of 2, many of these changes partially reversed. After that window closed, the changes tended to stay fixed for life. Isolation didn't just hurt these children emotionally, it shaped the physical architecture of their brains, and there was a closing door on how much of that could be undone. So, what does any of this have to do with you, scrolling through your phone tonight, feeling disconnected in a room full of people online? In 2010, a researcher named Julianne Holt-Lundstad at Brigham Young University combined data from over 148 studies covering more than 300,000 participants into a single massive analysis of loneliness and mortality. Her conclusion was almost impossible to believe. Chronic loneliness increased the risk of early death by an amount comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It was a stronger predictor of early death than obesity, stronger than physical inactivity. Your social connection, or the lack of it, was quietly acting on your body with the force of a genuine physical addiction. And this is happening at a scale nobody fully predicted. In 2023, the United States Surgeon General released a report describing loneliness as a public health epidemic, noting that the average American now spends far less time with friends than they did 2 decades ago, even as the number of digital connections in their pocket has exploded. You can have 500 followers and feel less known than a hunter-gatherer with 15 people around a single fire. Connection was never about quantity. Your ancient alarm system doesn't respond to notifications. It responds to presence, to eye contact, to shared silence in the same room. This is the strange contradiction at the center of modern life. You are more digitally connected than any generation of humans who has ever lived, and yet loneliness rates have climbed alongside every new platform built to fight it. Your brain was built for tribes of a few dozen people, all physically present, all mutually dependent for survival. It was never built for a feed of thousands of faces you will never actually touch, never actually sit beside, never actually need or be needed by in any real physical sense. So the next time you feel that quiet ache of being alone in a crowded room or in a crowded feed, understand what's actually happening underneath it. Your genes are shifting, your inflammatory markers are rising. The same circuitry that would fire if someone physically struck you is quietly activating instead. This isn't weakness. It isn't something wrong with you specifically. It's a 500,000-year-old survival system doing exactly what it was built to do, in a world it was never designed to recognize. You were lying in bed tonight, scrolling through photos of a party you weren't invited to, feeling a sadness you assumed would simply pass by morning. It won't just pass. It's already inside you, rewriting which genes switch on, which brain circuits stay sharp, how long your body expects to live. The ache isn't in your head. It never was. It's in every cell that's still waiting for a tribe that never came.